In about 360 BC, an elderly Greek philosopher named Plato sat down to write two of his late dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. In them, he described a vast island civilization called Atlantis, located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, larger than Libya and Asia combined, technologically advanced, ruled by 10 kings descended from the god Poseidon. According to Plato, this Atlantean civilization had attempted to conquer the entire ancient world. Athens, in alliance with other Greek cities, had stopped the invasion. Then, in a single terrible day and night, violent earthquakes and floods swept Atlantis into the sea. The civilization vanished. The story was supposedly 9,000 years old when Plato wrote it down. Plato attributed the account to his ancestor Solon, who had supposedly heard it from Egyptian priests during a visit to Sais around 600 BC. For most of antiquity, no one took the story very seriously. It was clearly a moral fable, not a historical record. Then, in the late 19th century, the obsession was born. Today, more than 2,400 years after Plato wrote about Atlantis, hundreds of books have been published claiming to identify the lost city's location. Atlantis has been placed in the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, the Sahara Desert, the Black Sea, the Bahamas, Antarctica, Sweden, Indonesia, and dozens of other places. Dozens of expeditions have been mounted. None have ever found Atlantis. So what is the real story? It begins with what Plato actually wrote. The dialogues are explicitly framed as moral teaching. Plato uses Atlantis as a foil for his ideal city, Athens. The point of the story is that an arrogant and overweight civilization, no matter how rich or powerful, will be destroyed if it loses its moral foundation. Atlantis is described as having degenerated from godly virtue into greed and military expansion. That is when the gods destroy it. Most ancient and medieval scholars understood this. Aristotle, Plato's own student, was famously skeptical and is reported to have remarked that the man who invented Atlantis is the same man who destroyed it. The 1st century BC geographer Strabo cited Aristotle when discussing the question. Through the Middle Ages, Atlantis was occasionally mentioned but rarely searched for. The modern obsession was born in 1882 when an American politician named Ignatius Donnelly published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Donnelly argued that Atlantis had really existed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that it was the source of all civilizations, that survivors had founded the cultures of Egypt, the Maya, and the Mississippi mound builders. The book was a publishing sensation, sold tens of thousands of copies, and inspired generations of pseudo-archaeology. By the 1920s, the famous American psychic Edgar Cayce was claiming to receive visions of Atlantis. Cayce predicted that part of Atlantis would rise from the ocean off the Bahamas in 1968 or 69. In 1968, an underwater rock formation now known as the Bimini Road was discovered off the Bahamas. Cayce believers immediately announced this was Atlantis. Geologists, including those who initially examined the formation, concluded the Bimini Road is a natural beach rock formation, similar to formations in many other locations around the world. The Atlantis claim has been thoroughly rejected by professional archaeology. So if Atlantis was a literary invention, why does it feel so real? Because Plato may have been weaving together memories of a real ancient catastrophe that haunted Greek cultural memory. In about 1600 BC, the volcanic island of Thera, modern-day Santorini in the Aegean Sea, exploded in one of the most violent eruptions in human history. The eruption was 3 to 6 times more powerful than the Krakatoa eruption of 1883. It removed an estimated 30 cubic miles of rock from the island. It generated tsunamis. It deposited ash across the eastern Mediterranean. The Minoan civilization, centered on the nearby island of Crete, was devastated. Many archaeologists believe the eruption contributed to the eventual collapse of the Minoan world. The Minoans were a real, technologically advanced, sea-based civilization with a fleet of ships, palaces, art, plumbing, and writing. They were absorbed into Mycenaean Greek culture in the centuries that followed. By Plato's time, more than 1,000 years later, the Minoans were a distant memory. But the cultural trauma of an advanced sea civilization devastated by sudden geological catastrophe may have lingered in oral traditions. Many modern scholars believe Plato heard versions of this